Hi, everyone. I'm excited for you to hear this bonus content on Ronald's book on Lincoln in Private because gets into how Lincoln thought and how he committed time to think through his ideas so he could understand where he got to how to approach a concept, a challenge, or just life. Let me read a bit. A deeply private man, shut off even to those who worked closely with him, Abraham Lincoln often captured his best thoughts, as he called them, in short notes to himself. He would work out his personal stances on the biggest issues of the day, never expecting anyone to see these frank, unpolished pieces of writing, which he then kept close at hand, in desk drawers and even in his top hat. The profound importance of these notes has been overlooked because the originals are scattered across several different archives and have never before been brought together and examined as a coherent whole. Why is this something I wanted you to hear as you're developing your leadership story? Because it's a way of how Lincoln thought through something and how he captured it and then how he kept it close to him so he could refer to it when he needed to think about what should he do next? How does he approach it? How does he see the issue bigger than what it is right now? So this is why I'm hoping you enjoy this bonus with Ronald. Talk to you soon.
So, as a segue, maybe we use it. Lincoln did this. He read out loud, which makes me feel better that I'm not the only person who needs to listen to audiobooks as I read. I'm about to get your other book because we're going to talk about Lincoln. Why don't you say a little bit about what this book is? Because it's not just a story of Lincoln and his history and his biographies. I'm going to call it, it's about Lincoln's notes.
That's right. What we knew but have not really gone deeply enough into is that Lincoln had an interesting habit. He wrote little notes to himself. Because he never thought anybody else would see them, he never dated them, never titled them, never signed them. Fortunately for us, 111 of these have survived. I'm convinced he must have written 1,000 of them, you know. Sometimes you and I, we would write notes to something and we might keep it for a while and then we might put it aside. So I said, well, let's see what the private Lincoln is saying in terms of not necessarily the public Lincoln. So what I discovered in these notes was he would use these notes to kind of tease out some of the most important issues he was facing, especially slavery. Let me get that book myself.
So, I'm going to try to do my best Ron White here, everybody. I love talking with high school students about Lincoln. I've spoken in public and private high schools in Massachusetts, Virginia, Florida, Tennessee, Illinois, Arizona, California, and Hawaii. Often I speak to 11th grade students who are studying U.S. history. When I speak about Lincoln's notes to himself, I ask the students, how long do you think it took him to write one of the fragments? Their answers are typically 1 minute, 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes. When I suggest he may have taken 1 or 2 hours to write a note, there is usually an audible gasp from the high schoolers. In our culture, with the distraction of our ever present screens, I think it's difficult for them to imagine Lincoln detaching himself from all the interruptions of his day to give himself such time, or even needing such time for this thoughtful reflection and writing. Because we've just talked about Chamberlain head to mouth, right? And there's a connection there. And now we're talking Lincoln. Now, Lincoln also read out loud, but Lincoln's talking head to hand. Do you have a note in particular?
There's so many wonderful ones. This one I think is quite remarkable. As I say, they're not dated, but editors over time have tried to maybe place this note in the notes into the date. So we're going to suggest this might have been in 1854. Lincoln had he served 1 year in Congress. He criticized the war with Mexico, which was not a smart thing to do in one sense. He comes back home and some of his constituents say, thanks very much for not electing you again. So he becomes a full-time lawyer. But then he re-enters the political fray in 1854 and he writes this note. If A can prove, however conclusively, that he may have right enslave B, why may not B snatch the same argument and prove equally that he might enslave A? Oh, you say A is white and B is black. It is color, then, the lighter, having the right to enslave the darker. Take care. By this rule, you are to be a slave to the first man you meet with a fairer skin than your own. Ah, you do not mean color exactly. You mean whites are intellectually the superior to blacks, and therefore have the right to enslave them. Take care again. By this rule, you are to be slave to the first man you meet with an intellect superior to your own. Ah, you say it's a question of interest, and if you can make it your interest, you have a right to enslave another. Very well, and if he can make it his interest, he has the right to enslave you. Think about the fact that Lincoln had, we think, but 1 year of formal education. Boys worked with their fathers on the farms, except in January and February when it was too cold, and parents would hire kind of traveling teachers to teach their sons. He might have done this 5, maybe 6 January and Februarys. That's all the formal education he has. And here's this incredibly intellectually curious person who writes these amazing notes. So in the book, at the end, I print out all 111 notes so we can see the whole range of these. So I just thought this was a kind of a unknown, basically unknown or missing part of the Lincoln story. That's why I call it Lincoln in private. It will often become Lincoln in public, although almost never does he use the notes word for word in some public speech, but you can see that they are the background, the foundation of some of his great speeches.
Okay, you emphasize formal education.
Right.
He's very well educated. I mean, he's reading the books, anything he can get his hands on. There's a
Right.
lot of his story that, he is,
Yeah.
as we've been talking about, he leans into being curious and self-teaching, right? That formal education only gets you so far, and then you have to take accountability for
Yes.
curious and teaching yourself. And Lincoln definitely leans into this. I mean, learns how to become a politician, learns how to become a lawyer, learns. So talk me through how, if you were to advise those high schoolers or those college students when they're getting so much thrown at them, so you need to achieve this and you need to do this, versus what I think is happening is just how do you evolve as a person? How do you carve out time for self discovery and self reflection and carve out times to create your own notes? What advice would you have now that you have Lincoln in your brain from his private notes?
Well, let me also recommend to parents, especially, the book by Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation, which documents the story of when the smartphone really became central in the lives of our young people and what that is doing differently to girls, differently to boys, that it really is taking over our lives. It's owning our lives. So Lincoln, in a different era, for sure, this is a 19th century person. He is willing in the midst of his busy life to take time away to really think and to write. And there's something about writing, I think, that is really powerful here. To just write down your thoughts, to be quiet, to shut out all the noise that's out there, and to do this as a regular discipline. I think that's part of his beauty. I'm now working on a new biography of John Quincy Adams, the sixth president of the United States. He started a diary at age 12. If you could believe it, he ended up writing 16,000 pages by the time he died at age 80. Well, why did he write the diary? Somewhat like Lincoln, the diary was his method of self-improvement, of charting his own growth. And he was also willing at times to say, "You were not a good listener tonight. You were not respectful of Mr. So and so when he spoke." So he's charting his own growth in that diary, another method of writing. And this is the way that he watches his own moral growth hopefully improve in his lifetime.
That's worth repeating because normally when you say a diary, it's almost like this is a chronology of what happened today
Right.
versus
Yeah.
reflecting. Because if you take what you're saying about Quincy Adams and he's doing, at the end of the day, what were my successes and where do I want? And I would hope he would give himself credit, but also just giving yourself time to think about what you believe, right? Because that's what Lincoln is doing is he's saying, I am going to carve out time to learn what I think and make up my own mind. I'm going to allow myself time to have my own critical thinking.
Yes.
And and all of those ingredients, knowing more of the book and digesting it and enjoying it amongst others, you can start to, as you're reading it, start to see the connection points. You can start to see like the diagram of where this note might have influenced this speech or influenced this moment where he made this decision. But those aren't, we always give him credit for making those decisions in the moment. He was already thinking through the ingredients 10, 15 years beforehand.
Yes, I think for Lincoln, this was his way of thinking through these issues. So believe it or not, it's hard to remember that he as president, he only gave 4 or 5 speeches. Presidents in those days didn't give a lot of speeches. Today, there's all kinds of speeches. But the notes was the way that he was wrestling with all the great issues of his time. And that he did this writing of these notes. These notes became his fulcrum by which he thought about the great issues.
Where he could talk to himself
He
in those
talked to
moments.
himself, and then, even as president, he had an African American kind of a attendant in the White House, and this man wrote down in his kind of memory, he told this to his daughter, that even in the evening as Lincoln would be reading, he would take little slips of paper and just write out something that he learned from this particular book, and this man thought this was kind of an unusual practice, but this is the way he did it. He wrote out things. It's very interesting that the studies have shown here, again, I sound like an antiquarian, but if a student would take notes by writing it on a piece of paper, that is better retention than writing it on a computer. When you write it with your own hand, it is more becomes part of yourself and your brain than if you're simply typing it on a computer. I'm not suggesting that's gonna happen, but I think that's what once upon a time people did.
I would hope that people think of this as you have options and use all,
Yeah.
right? Right? Because do I think that AI helps me, find an answer faster so I can think about it, but then do I still need to carve out those moments to have my own critical thinking and write it down and self-reflect on it so I can put my pieces together so I can figure out because, as we're building all of this, if you are taking on the responsibility of being a leader and the impact that that means, it can be a very quiet moment when you have to make that decision. And if you don't take time to put those stories in your brain, put the stories on paper, and critically think through it like Lincoln, those are much lonelier moments than they could be. You could have all of those voices in your head, your own voice, somebody else's voice, and it gives you that little extra bit of courage when you may not have it because the best decisions tend to be in the darkest
I
moment.
like what you said there, Elaine. If you would take the time to be in a quiet moment. I mean, I struggle all the time. I'm starting to work at writing at 7:30 in the morning, but what about the email? Should I look at the email? Do I wanna look at this, that, or the other? It's a real discipline to protect ourselves from all this outside noise that's coming in. We have to somehow find that quiet moment. Now we're taking away, the phones from our students in our schools. Think that seems to be helping. Teachers are saying that it seems like students are more concentrating about their studies. But how do we preserve in this world some of those quiet moments when we can just do our own thinking? I think that's a great challenge.
And then it really is where the unique abilities of people start to shine through. Well, we have covered some amazing ground in all of this. Is there another story that you want to put into the mix before I wrap us up?
Well, here's an interesting story that I just was thinking about recently. Photography was only invented in 1838. And the way that photographers wanted to celebrate their new craft was to take the photograph of an important person, put it in their front window, and hopefully draw in ordinary people at their photographs taken. So Lincoln is traveling in Illinois, small town. Photographer realizes he's in town and says, "Would you be willing to come to my store? I would like to get your photograph. It would really help my business if I could photograph you. You're an important politician." So Lincoln says, "Sure, I'm happy to do that." So in those days, it took quite a bit of time. So as Lincoln stands there to be posed, the photographer says, "My goodness, sir," he said, "your hair is all messed up." He says, "Could I please just sort of straighten your hair so that you look a little better for the photograph?" So the guy gets back behind his hood and everything, and he looks up, and there's the hair all messed up again. He said, "What have you done?" He said, "People wouldn't recognize me. People wouldn't recognize me." So that says so much about who he was. People wouldn't recognize me.
I love that. He didn't take himself too seriously, did he?
Yeah,
And I'm like,
take yourself too seriously. I think what's missing in today's politics, there's a lot of things missing, but it's self-deprecation. Humor is not simply poking fun at other people, it's being willing to poke fun at yourself. And I think Lincoln had a wonderful ability, and Grant did too, to poke fun at himself. Boy, that means you're really secure as an individual. You can make jokes about yourself, be self-deprecating. Oh, I wish we could be more self-deprecating and not be so pompous.
who knows? Maybe this will be the drop that creates the
Maybe.